The issue overall becomes one of strategy in all of this. Everybody has pretty much the same goal. I want you to listen to what your boss, President Trump, said at the G7 when asked about this uncertainty, this strategy of seeming to, a negotiating strategy, going from one side to the other and back again. Have a listen, sir.
Sorry, it's the way I negotiate.
So my question is that a strategy? Is it a strategy to call President Xi an enemy one day and then say that relations are very good the next day? And then, you know, I mean, it's gone back.
It's the way I negotiate. It's done very well for me over the years, and it's doing even better for the country.
All right, now, Peter, I'm not going to ask you to comment on that strategy. He is, after all, your boss. But you will agree it is different to any strategy you've worked for from a public policy official before?
Certainly, the tariffs are central to the strategy of this administration, and they work in different ways depending on the situation. For steel and aluminum, we had to put tariffs on simply to defend our domestic industries against what was a flood and glut of international imports into this country. In the case of Mexico, for example, when we threatened tariffs, we literally got more done in 2 weeks on our immigration policy than any previous president done in the last 20 years. And I think, Richard, you might agree with me on this. Absent the tariffs that have been put in place on China, China would never have come to the bargaining table and advanced this far in those negotiations. And as a fourth element of the strategy, we are seeing on a daily basis new investment come in from Japan, from Germany, other places in Europe, particularly in our auto industry, simply because of the concern of these countries over the possibility of auto tariffs. So President Trump is using the tariff strategy, I think, brilliantly. It's a great defense of this country. It has a long history as part of this country in terms of previous presidents. And yes, he's doing it different than any modern president, but certainly not within the context of the broad sweep of American history.
As for was I on the phone call, I was on the phone call. The phone call was in the context of, now I guess I've been the Secretary of State for coming on a year and a half. I know precisely what the American policy is with respect to Ukraine. It's been remarkably consistent, and we will continue to try to drive those set of outcomes.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that President Trump pressed the president of Ukraine 8 times to work with Rudy Giuliani to investigate Joe Biden's son. What do you know about those conversations?
So you just gave me a report about a high-seek whistleblower campaign, none of which I've seen.
The breach with China, the deep connections between the United States. We will, of course, do our constitutional duty to cooperate with this co-equal branch. But we are going to do so in a way that is consistent with the fundamental values of the American system. And we won't tolerate folks on Capitol Hill bullying, intimidating State Department employees. That's unacceptable, and it's not something that I'm going to permit to happen.
Any effort by the Secretary, by the President, or anyone else to interfere with the Congress's ability to call before it relevant witnesses will be considered as evidence of obstruction of the lawful functions of Congress.
As for was I on the phone call, I was on the phone call. The phone call was in the context of, now I guess I've been the Secretary of State for coming on a year and a half. I know precisely what the American policy is with respect to Ukraine. It's been remarkably consistent, and we will continue to try to drive those set of outcomes. It's what our team, including Ambassador Volker, were focused on, was taking down the threat that Russia poses there in Ukraine. It was about helping the Ukrainians to get graft out and corruption outside of their government, and to help now this new government in the Ukraine build a successful, thriving economy. It's what the State Department officials that I've had the privilege to lead have been engaged in, and it's what we will continue to do, even while all this noise is going on.
This was early on this Wednesday morning, and what we're seeing from this is that it is somewhat of a departure from what we've been seeing in recent months from North Korea. Now, this is the 11th launch, as far as our tally goes, since May that we've seen from Pyongyang. But we had been seeing different weapons systems. We've been seeing short-range missiles. This is the first time in a few years we've actually seen the missile being launched from under the water. A U.S. official saying it was launched from an underwater platform, so not from a submarine itself. But it shows that North Korea is testing different technology. It shows that it is moving beyond just those short-range missiles, that it knows that the US President Donald Trump doesn't mind. He has said publicly that all countries do it. It does not bother him. So they appear to be pushing the envelope just a little bit further now. And of course, it just comes, Rosemary, and that matter of hours after the US and North Korea had finally agreed to sit down at the negotiating table again. Well, there's a number of reasons that are being touted as why North Korea has done this. For a start, it has done this in the past as well, ahead of negotiations with different countries, laying down certain parameters as to what is not on the negotiating table, but potentially some experts looking to the fact that the US president has condoned these launches in the past and doesn't seem concerned about them. He said he's concerned about the nuclear tests and the ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that could hit mainland United States. So potentially North Korea feels emboldened to be able to try a little more technology ahead of those negotiations. Now, there has been a National Security Council meeting here in South Korea. They say they are concerned by the launch. A stronger response from Japan. We heard from the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe saying that this does violate UN resolutions, saying that North Korea is not allowed to use ballistic technology.
Cassini has been in orbit around Saturn for almost 13 years, and our unexpected discoveries about Enceladus have been some of the most surprising. Today, we're publishing a paper about our recent findings by Cassini on Enceladus. We've detected hydrogen in the plume of Enceladus. That hydrogen is coming from a hydrothermal vent on the seafloor of Enceladus, going out into space through the plume. And so this is a very significant finding because the hydrogen could be a potential source of chemical energy for any microbes that might be in Enceladus's ocean. So this is a very exciting finding for the Cassini team. Now, Enceladus is too small to have retained the hydrogen when it formed. And so the hydrogen we see today, the hydrogen gas, is coming from inside Enceladus. So let's take a quick look at some of Cassini's past findings. With this first image, this is a view of the south pole of Enceladus. And the geysers or the jets are coming from those 4 cracks we nicknamed tiger stripes, those bluish fractures that you can see at the south pole of Enceladus. In the next picture, you can see that these jets are shooting out into space, forming the giant plume around Enceladus. Underneath that icy crust, as Jim said, there's a global ocean. That global ocean sits on top of a rocky core. And some of Cassini's findings pointed to hydrothermal vents, basically hot water coming out after it's been mixed with the rocky core. And this final image shows a thermal map, the temperature of the South Pole. And we can see the warmest temperatures with the yellow and red are right along the tiger stripe fractures. So what's new today? The new finding is finding hydrogen coming from the plume of Enceladus and the fact that it could support potentially microbes with energy on the seafloor of Enceladus. Now, this finding is the result of 12 years of Cassini investigations, and it really represents a capstone finding for the mission, because we now know that Enceladus has almost all of the ingredients that you would need to support life as we know it on Earth.